Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CISO Podcast. My name is Todd Wadle, and with me here is Jonathan Kimmitt.
Hi, everybody.
And today we're going to talk about what CISOs should do with pen tests. Organizations have pen tests for a number of reasons. The question is what the follow-up is. What should organizations do with that information, and especially in the role of CISO, as Jonathan is for us and has been for a long time. Jonathan, what would you say you did as far as pen test reports, or why you thought they were important?
Well, for me, the pen test, when I had the team come in, it was part validation of my security controls. So it was the things that I had implemented over, the period of time between pen tests that I wanted to specifically test. But I also wanted to tell me what I was missing. How am I doing at my security controls, implementing the organization, but also what have I not thought about? What are some attack vectors that I hadn't really considered in the organization that they're going to consider? So I think that that's what I used it for. But, it really depends on what the reason is you have the pen test. Because organizations get pen tests for a variety of reasons. They might have a federal regulation that says they have to do it. There might be a cybersecurity insurance that says they have to do it. It could be their board says they have to do it, the board of directors. So there's a variety of reasons. Now, the downside to those is those are because you have to. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to when I started it. But I wanted to. I wanted to have that pen test. I wanted to see what was actually happening in my environment. And I needed that outside opinion. I mean, no matter how much you look at a system, and when I say system, I'm talking about your network, your computers, your people, everything. You're going to miss things because you see it every single day. It's like reading a paper that you've written. Mm-hmm. When you write it, you know what you want to say. But that's not what's on the paper per se. There may be words missing. There may be, of course, punctuation and spelling, whatever. You really need to have that outside view to come in and help you with that. So,
especially because an attacker may actually normalize. So,
absolutely.
To sort of obfuscate why they're there. So if you see it enough, you're not even realizing you're seeing it, and it's actually what an attacker could be using so that you don't notice.
Yeah, you really want to have that outside opinion to come in and shake things up. Now, I think that becomes problematic, though, because when you get that outside opinion, a lot of organizations are afraid of it. They're afraid of pen tests. They're afraid of the report. Now, it could be because they think they're going to get fired if they have a bad pen test. I think that's a bad way to see it. And if you're in an environment where you have that fear, you might consider getting a different environment because the pen test report, and in fact, it's not even just the report, it's the actual penetration test itself. That is so useful and so helpful. I was there when the engineers were in to do the pen test at the organization. I was in the other office, and I basically told them, like, go for it. Mm-hmm. Whatever you want to do. There's a few limitations I put on there for life safety, but beyond that, I told them to do whatever they wanted to do, and it was my job to give them that opportunity. But when I got that report back, it was hugely beneficial. It showed me a few things that I hadn't thought about. It gave me opportunities to improve certain things, but it also showed me things that we were doing well, and I think that that's where the real value comes in. Now, you'd still have to meet compliance requirements. There's still a lot of things you have to do. But for me, I want CISOs to truly value that pen test and the pen test report because it's an opportunity to truly grow in the environment. You're stressing your controls a little bit. You're stressing the process a little bit. And then once you stress it, you can kind of find your weaknesses.
Yeah, and I think that compliance element, which I think is so key and critical and needed, it seems like that could actually prevent or make it easy to not be proactive, because something we see with compliance is, a lot of companies are November, December, January gets really full because companies realize, we have to do this.
Yep.
Well, that probably means you're getting the report and not being in the right time frame or even
Yeah.
frame of mind to be able to take that report and do what you need to with it because, okay, we had to get this done. My guess is then the follow-up is that has to be presented in a certain time frame instead of, hey, let's get this, let's consider this, let's figure out what we need to do about it.
Well, and I think that when you're being forced to do a pen test like this, honestly, as human beings, we want to do the minimum. That's just a reality. So you get the pen, and we see it. I mean, when we get a kickoff call and, we're ready to go and we're like, okay, what do you want us to do? And then they start putting limitations on us, which we'll talk about in a minute. They start giving us very short timelines, and they really just want a basic report. In fact, I've had some where, I had one. I'm not a pen tester, but I try to help out where I can. But I was doing an IT audit very soon after the pen test. And a lot of times we'll put those side by side or, back to back to whatever we need to do. Because I can use parts of the pen test in my audit side. So when we can plan it, that's great. But when I got to the kickoff call and they say, well, we never have anything on our pen test report, so you can just assume there's not going to be anything. No. Number one, that's a bad idea from an IT audit perspective. And number two, no, that's, if you just assume you're not going to have anything on the pen test report. And we've also had where, we had one where when we provided the report, they got really angry when we found problems.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they say, well, we've had pen tests by other companies and nobody's ever shown us this before. And we say, well, that's actually not our fault. Yeah. Actually, we would hope you would realize this is actually really good. And sometimes that's just a different pen test company. It's not necessarily, any error, but to say that's actually part of the reason you want to have these is,
oh, absolutely. Yes.
And we have had companies where legitimately we didn't find anything because they had really good controls. Yeah. Other times it may be because there was a limitation, or maybe another pen test company had just not found the things we did.
And I also think that there's definitions. I think people call things pen tests that really aren't.
Right.
So, when Alias talks about a penetration test, there's actually 5 or 6 different things that we can do. We have a external pen test where we sit on the outside of the network and we try to get in. We have an internal pen test, so we sit on the inside of the network and we try to bounce around and pivot and find vulnerabilities and whatever. We do a social engineering pen test. We do a physical pen test. I think I'm missing one there. I think there's a 5th one there.
We always do some dark web research. What's out there? What credentials are leaked? What could you potentially do with that? Or alternatively, if the pen test is set up such that we can, what can those credentials then be used for exploit?
Right. And we even have a pen test plus. So it's an additional part of the pen test that we have where we do not only attacks against the organization, but attacks against individuals in that organization, key individuals that may cause a risk to the organization itself. So we've got a variety of pen tests. Now, they're all penetration tests. We're trying to get in, trying to use our skill sets to get in the organization, to get access to systems, to get access to computers or networks or user accounts. When we're doing a physical pen test and we're trying to get into the building, we're going to break into the building, we're going to get to the data center, we're going to get access to computers, we might find passwords that way, install keyloggers, install pivot points, whatever it is. So, and there is a significant difference between a vulnerability assessment, a vulnerability scan, and a pen test.
Which we see all the time. Companies will say, we do pen tests, and we look at it and we say, no, you just scan their network. And that's actually something we do first. So for an external or internal, first we're going to do a scan, which gives a general sense of here are vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities. What can we then do with those?
Yes.
Whereas the scan could tell you, one, could miss things, because our guys find things all the time that aren't on the vulnerability scan. Or alternatively, there's something that says, man, this is critical. We go in and test and we're like, well, it looks critical. The scan said it was critical. It wasn't.
But you can't do anything with it once you're in,
Or alternatively, this said low, but hey, we're able to use this to get persistence.
And a vulnerability assessment, which is different than a vuln scan and a pen test, I always like talking about it, that it's a pen test with the people there, because we're going to go in. We do more than just a pen test, but we go in, we'll attempt all these things while someone is standing right beside us or sitting right beside us so that they can learn how we're doing it, what we're doing, and we're doing an assessment. So we're going to do a lot more involved. I mean, a pen test is we're trying to act like the attackers. Sometimes it's called a red team engagement, which is a little bit different, but we're thinking like the attacker is trying to get into the organization. Whereas a risk assessment, we're kind of doing the same thing, but really we're sitting down with the individuals in the organization and we're saying, okay, let's look through your configurations. Let's look through your firewalls. Let's do this. Now we're going to try some things and see if it works and see if you see it, see if your SOC sees it, whatever. So, I mean, they're just different things, but out in the industry, an organization might consider a vulnerability scan as a pen test, and it's really not.
Right.
And I think that's where the danger comes in, because if an organization is checkboxing a form or something and they do a vulnerability scan because it's cheap and it's easy, and they go, oh yeah, I didn't find anything, that's not really a pen test. But furthermore, that's less useful to the CISO.
Right.
I mean, you can go and get a vulnerability scan. You can run a vulnerability scan itself, but it only gives you part of the picture. It doesn't really tell you the attack method. Right. It doesn't really tell you the attack path and the attack profile. It just tells you you've got some vulnerable stuff based off some signature or some process in which a tool will scan and says, oh, well, this thing has a known remote command execution vulnerability, or has a known DOS vulnerability, or whatever it is. So I think because everyone calls them a little bit different, that becomes problematic.
Well, and like you said, the attack path, I write our reports, and one of the things I love is it's actually a form of storytelling.
Yes.
Because I look at what our engineers do and say, okay, well, you did this led to this led to this. And so the client can actually see, you started here, that does not seem serious, but I was able to do these other 5 things, and I ended here. So, but none of these things would have been possible without that first vulnerability. And so for a client to be able to see that, instead of just, here's these apparently random things, but here's how we can chain them together to lead to an exploit.
And that's one of the things that I really like how we do our pen test. And even when I was a CISO outside of the organization, I had you guys do my pen test for me because I liked the way you guys did them and the reports that you provided, because it was a full picture. Now, that's not to say that, like when we're doing an internal pen test, that while we absolutely go through and we try to get domain admin, but when we come in, we'll also ask for domain admin or ask for elevated privileges just to save some time. We'll work through the process. If we don't get it, great, but we still need to know what happens if we did get it. Right. What could we do? What kind of damage that we can do? So it is a process. And that's where the CISO, I think a CISO really comes into understanding how their system works, is when they have an all-out pen test. Now, I said earlier that, there's, 4 or 5 different kinds of pen tests. I recommend to CISOs, and this is not a sales thing, this is honest to God truth. Don't limit your pen test. Go all out. You need to truly understand how an attacker is going to social engineer their way into your network, what vulnerabilities are coming in from the outside, and then once they're in, what can they do? So you really need to understand all the pieces. In fact, I was talking with a client the other day, and they were talking about what was the need for us to do a physical, because I was going to do a physical assessment for them as part of my engagement with them. And the security, the organization's security came to me and goes, I don't think you should need to do that. We're not worried about that. It's like, really? You mean if I get through that door right there and I get into facilities engineers and I get their keys, I can't get into everything else in the department? Well, who would do that?
Anyone.
The bad guys?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really... So I really encourage CISOs to They need to understand all of the pieces. They need to understand how an attacker is going to attack them from the outside, what information they're going to gather out on the internet, how are they going to get into your network, and then once they're on your network, how they're going to bounce around and do different things. You need to have a full picture. It really frustrates me when I'm talking to a CISO or maybe even a CIO, and they say, no, we just want, here is this IP address on the outside. Right. That's what I want you to pen test. In fact, we had one, they basically had a limited engagement, and when we were going through, we actually found additional IP addresses, and our tools scanned them, looked for vulnerabilities, and they found some, but it was not part of the engagement. So the report only had that original engagement. So we reached out to them. It's like, hey,
you should know.
Yeah, we found these things, and they're vulnerable to this stuff. We didn't try to get into them because that wasn't appropriate. And they said, oh yeah, we know, but that's not part of your engagement. I immediately was like, wait a minute. You know these are vulnerable, and you're intentionally telling us to ignore them? That organization lost points with me.
Yeah.
You know, as I'm looking in the industry, in the community, I immediately said, okay, that's dangerous.
Yeah.
So we did tell them. It was like, hey, we found this. We were doing a scan. These IP addresses came up in the scan.
You should know.
You should know. Well, I think that's very it's naive from an organization's point of view. And I understand why they do it, by the way. I mean, I understand there's a lot of IT people that they look at a pen test and they get scared. They get scared of the results. They think they're going to get fired. They think that they're going to look bad. They're going to say, well, you know, if they find a problem that I should have fixed, then, you know, they're going to judge me. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I wanted to have stuff fixed, you know.
Well, and I think one of the things that I really appreciate is I totally understand that fear from IT people.
Sure.
But it's different when one of the things is our guys go on site for internals, which is a distinction. And part of that is so that we can tell people right away. One, they can actually meet us. Here's who we are.
Yep.
Let's make sure that we're actually in the network if we're supposed to be in. But then also, if there is something, there can be some debrief immediate of, hey, here are some of the things we found. If there's anything critical, we always immediately say, hey, we're going to put this in the report, but fix this.
But you need
now.
to fix it.
And I think saying to those IT people, we get that you are probably overworked, overwhelmed, don't have time or potentially expertise. That's where we see it as a resource to you, but also you may then be able to take that information and advocate and say, we need more staff because I can't keep up with this.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly why you use the pen test report later. After you get it and after it shows you that you found problems, that's when you go to your leadership and say, okay, here's what they found. And here's the problem with that. The pen test crew found it, but so have attackers.
Right.
If you think the attackers haven't found it yet, you're wrong. Just flat wrong. They have found it. Whether or not they've taken advantage of it yet, that's different. But they know it's there. If you want to see, here's the best thing to do. IT people, if let's say you don't have a CISO, let's say you don't have security at all, and you're wanting to understand kind of how bad this is, go look at Shodan, shodan.io. Yep. Do a search for the IP addresses that you manage and see what it finds. If you see anything out there, every attacker out there is seeing the same thing. So if you see an open SMTP, an open telnet, an open SSH that Shodan sees in your environment because they're looking on the public internet, that means every attacker is seeing that as well.
Well, and we'll actually do that sometimes when we go to do trainings. If the company's open to it, we'll say, hey, here's Shodan, because we want to show them here's what attackers use.
Yep.
And so we'll say, hey, here's your domain, and we'll pull it up and we'll start showing them. And sometimes there are things in that meeting that's like, this is open.
Yes.
Go close it right now. But they simply don't know.
I had that happen on one of my audits. I went in, was doing a basic audit, just a normal general IT controls audit is what we call it. And I went in and was asking questions. Now, to be fair, when I go in, I do it kind of the modern way of doing auditing, where I actually have them show the controls and demonstrate that those controls are there. But we were talking, and I was doing my scanning and whatever, and I found a problem. Like, that's odd. Hold on, everyone. Wait just 1 second. Guys, we have a problem here. And they stopped and they looked at me. And it's like, I just logged into your core router.
Oh my gosh.
With no password. They're like, what? And it's like, well, here, let me show you. And I plugged my laptop into a big screen and thing, and I dunk, dunk, dunk. And here, let me try it from France. So I jumped onto a jump box in France, and I SSH'd into their core router. I freaked them out because they were like, anybody could do it. I was like, I'm pretty sure someone has.
Yeah.
I don't have any proof of it, but if it's out there, I'm sure someone is trying. Well, what had happened was the user account that I tried was a default cred, and they had reset the password. They nulled it out.
Right.
But they always use another user account to get in the system, so that one, of course, had a password and whatever. Well, it's like, okay, I'm auditing you, but you need to fix this right now. And so they went in and they fixed it, and I wrote in my report that I found it, but they fixed it immediately, so that I could give them credit for the work that they did. But we do that all the time, and that's one of the reasons why I like the way we do our pen tests, because we are there. If we do find a problem, we can say, whoa, wait a second, guys. You need to fix this right now. This is not something to hold off into whenever. It's do this right now. And it protects them. It allows us. Now, it may have been a way for us to get in.
Right.
But if it causes a risk to the organization, we're not just going to let it stand.
Right.
They need to fix it. That's the whole point. So when we're doing these pen tests, you're absolutely right. We're going in. We're working with the organization. Mm-hmm. Even though we're the red team, we're coming in to be the attackers. If we find something, we're going to call, whether it's 2:00 in the morning, and it's really the same if we can get into the building.
Right.
If we can break into your building with a pencil, then
which we can.
Oh yeah. Very, very normally, easily done. We can. We're going to call someone who's like, "Hey, everyone, guess what?
Right.
Here's this risk. Here's this vulnerability, and here's the threat to that. Therefore, here's the risk. And you need to fix this. This is not something to wait till the morning or the next week or when we give you the report. It's you need to do it now."
And I think the other thing is, of course, our guys are engineers. They're ethical hackers. They like seeing how far they can get legally. Sure. And with the organization. But I think there can also be the perspective of they're sort of looking to catch things and catch. I think that's the IT. Yep. And instead, one of the things that I really appreciate is companies that have us do pen tests, multiple years in a row. Sometimes we find literally the same thing year after year after year.
Yes.
And that's really discouraging.
Yeah.
But other times we find where, hey, we did this pen test this year. Here are the more critical things we found. Year 2 or 6 months later or whatever. Yep. Okay, they've shored those up. Well, okay, so now here are the things you should work on. And by the 3rd or 4th, the report's almost nothing because everything we have identified, they've nailed. And really the report is, your controls are solid. Yeah. And we're actually really glad about that because that means that you have taken the information, done your job.
Yep.
Of course, it's frustrating, I'm sure, for the engineers to be like, man, I didn't get anything. But they also have the attitude of, I didn't get anything, but I'm really glad because this organization has really done its work.
Yeah. It is frustrating because you try so hard to be successful. And when you have security controls, it stops you from being successful. Yeah, I can see that.
They get frustrated.
Yeah. But on the flip side, you were talking about earlier about how we come in after another organization. So, and as a CISO, I recommend people will otherwise switch out your pen test team every few years, just like auditing requirements. So like accounting auditing requirements, you have to change your auditors every few years. And that's perfectly acceptable. And I think that that's actually a good thing because we will get things, or we go in after another pen test company and we will find things and they're like, we didn't know anything about this. In fact, there was one I had the CISO call me up and he says, Jonathan, listen, you guys gave us a really good report and you found all this stuff. My leadership is really angry right now. I was like, why? He goes, because we've been getting pen tests from this other company. They didn't find any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the items we actually found, it was a problem since 2005 or something. And he says, I don't know how to explain it. And I go, well, I mean, I can help you. And so we sat down, we wrote the report. So it was, our report was going to him and we had everything, but then I helped him write the report to his leadership. And basically it was different organizations have different methodologies, different processes, different skill sets, whatever. And, sometimes you get a company who they just aren't as skilled and they didn't find the stuff. But they're also, well, we didn't find it last time, so we're not even going to look for it this time,
right?
Which is dangerous. So he was extremely excited that we found all these problems because that was stuff that he could go fix. And he did. And he went and he fixed it. But there for a couple of weeks, we went back and forth because his leadership was mad that we found a whole bunch of stuff. And it wasn't that they were mad at us per se. Right. It was just, why did this other company not find it? What are they doing different? Maybe they thought we were padding the report or something, and we weren't. It's like, hey, we got domain admin this way and this way and this way and this way. So it is useful to, I would say, every couple of years at least change your pen test groups because you get those different points of view. The kind of speaking of that report that he was presenting to his leadership, that's really, really important. And we spend a lot of times on our reports. I mean, we have a report writer. We hired you to help us write these reports. That is your job, along with the 10 other jobs he has here, including doing all the podcasts. But, the information that we provide in these reports are extremely useful to CISOs if they take it.
Right.
If they actually read through what we provide. And sometimes they argue with this, well, that's not really a threat. It's like, oh, thunk, domain admin. And sometimes they will tell us like, well, we really needed to say things like this because that's what our leadership want to hear. It's like, okay, sure, we're not going to change the report. We're not going to remove things. But if you need us to write it a certain way to make it, I don't know what the right word is.
So it'll be received well.
Yes.
So that potentially whatever it is you're trying to communicate, the leadership will actually act on.
Yes, and that's what we want. We want the report to be helpful to you as the CISO, but also helpful to your leadership. So that comes down to the question. I know you didn't ask this question, but it leads into the question because it's thinking about the client. Is how do you use the report?
I'll ask it now. How do you use the report?
I'm glad you asked that question. I was just thinking about that. I hope everyone understands that we've started this podcast 4 or 5 times and we just kind of get onto a roll. We've had to restart. We laugh and it's been fun.
It's
anyway, so one of the things that you can do with the report is the CISO has to take the report for what it is. It is a snapshot in time of the engineers attempting to utilize some vulnerability in the organization to get access. It's not every single possible way to get into the organization. Does not mean that they found every single way to get in the organization. It is a snapshot in time for that engineer at that time. It could be that another engineer comes in and they find a different way.
Right.
It's just a reality. You have to understand that. So it's a snapshot in time. Now, what it can give you is as you read through what the process was for the engineer to attack you, where did they find the initial passwords? Where did they find the initial credentials? Where did they find these things? Because those are all controls you have to think about as a CISO. Right. So you read through that. It's like, okay, well, that's how they got the beginning of the year. And then they phished us. And that's where they found that, with this department or this person, they were able to get additional access. But then they found a vulnerability, and that's how they got into this network over here. But then they found a password that was weak here, and they used that to jump over here. Like you said, it tells a story. Right. And that story is that attack path. And as a CISO, I might find, let's say we number the different steps, 1 through 20. 20 is they got domain admin. 1 is they search us on the internet, and everything in between. I may not be able to fix number 19 quickly, but I could fix number 3 quickly, or 4 or 5. So that whole story is really important to the CISO to read through it and understand it. And that's one of the reasons why we do it the way we do it, is to give people that information in that format of saying, okay, this is what they did. This is what we found. And I will tell you, we've had reports where we have found other things that we put in there that were just informational, that maybe it was a vulnerability, but it was at least concerning.
Right.
It's like, hey, you need to think about this. This is problematic. And what we find is, because that was extra work, but the client really, really liked it, because it was like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that we weren't running split DNS or whatever it may be.
Yeah, part of it is just having the ability to know your environment, which we find all the time, where, we'll do an Active Directory audit and here's 18 machines running Windows 7.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't even use those anymore. Okay, but they're still in your environment.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, yes, we know about those. This is how we have controls in place. Great. Yep. But just knowing that that's out there is really key.
And then they have 42 domain admins that have logged into those Windows XP machines. Right. So these are all things that we have found legitimate. We have found these on pen tests within the last year. Right. Okay, so now that's how the CISO uses it. Goes down the path and has figured out what kind of controls they need to implement, what they need to improve, what they need to change. But now we got to get to the leadership side. And this is usually where I come in and I help the CISOs, because I'm not a pen tester. I like playing. I like helping. I can do a little bit, but I'm not as a professional pen tester. But what I do is I help CISOs talk to leadership. And what I usually tell them is like, okay, you have this pen test report. You need your own report that mirrors this. But what it needs to say is, in the report, how are you going to solve these problems? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Because that's what leadership wants to know. Leadership wants to know, okay, if I'm let's say John Smith is the CISO. Yeah, Mr. Smith, you had a pen test. Tell us the results. I can guarantee you 99 out of 100 times they are not wanting to know that the attacker used a SQL injection to get into this host, and they use a privs to get up, and they jumped. They don't care about that. What they want to know is, okay, you found problems. How much is it going to cost, and how long is it going to take to fix these problems? So I help them write that report to where they take all the information from the pen test and they create a plan. And that plan is generally a year, but most of the time you pick your high priority ones first. What can you change right now with zero money? What can you change? What can you change right now because it's super absolutely critical? What can you change because it's zero money, maybe a little bit of time? And then you start building your priorities of how much time is it going to cost? How much money is it going to cost? And that's what you present to leadership, because that's what they want to know. They want to know that they're safe, that they're in compliance, that they're meeting the requirements, but they also want to know, okay, well, there are problems. How do we fix them? And that's the important part for the CISO.
Well, and also the fact that's part of the reason that we want the people on site to know, because you can also demonstrate initiative. Maybe we told you this is really critical, so you remediated it, or sometimes it's not critical, but we'll put language in there like, as of the writing of this report, X, Y, and Z have been remediated.
Yes.
So it wasn't something we said, go fix this right now. But it was something where the IT people said, you know what? Those are quick fixes.
Yep.
We can do them. Okay, well, now you're able to show, well, within the couple weeks before we got the report, we've already showed initiative in this. Here's our plan for everything else.
Yes. I mean, we love to put in that they fixed it immediately. Yeah. But some things you just can't do that. It takes time. Go ahead and fix them. We'll let you know what the problems are so you can fix them. If you fix them, I'm happy to put a note in the report saying, hey, they have otherwise fixed this problem. But if you can't, because you don't have the resources, you don't have the people power, you don't have the money, well, then let's build a presentation to the leadership so that you can go and ask for those things. And then that way you're doing part of the business functionality. From an accounting perspective, they call it the fiduciary. Can't think of the name of the. It's the fiduciary responsibility.
Okay.
Can't think of the name. Anyway, it's you have a responsibility to improve. Now that you know there's a problem, it is your responsibility to change it. To fix it, to protect your customers, protect your data, protect your networks, whatever it is. And the pen test tells you, like, hey, here's the problems. But now it's your responsibility as a CISO to present to the leadership how you're going to fix it. If you take the report and you sit on it, that's negligence, honestly. And I hate to be that blunt about it, but it's true. If you get a pen test and you sit on that pen test, that's negligence. If you know there's problems and you don't fix them, that's really problematic. And in some cases, as we have seen in the news over the last year about CISOs getting in trouble for things they didn't do, we're talking criminal charges, and fines and all kinds of different things. So it's not something that people could do anymore. Now, I'm gonna take one more step to that. Is I think every organization should be doing an entire gambit of pen tests. I'm talking physical, social, internal, external. Oh, web application. That was the other web application pen test. You need to be doing all of them, and even Pen Test Plus in some some organizations, if they've got high risk individuals that have remote access or they work from home. There's all kinds of these things that you need to understand what the risks are. And if you don't understand, and you should have, that puts you at risk. It puts you personally as a CISO at risk, along with the organizations and the data subjects and everybody you have in your system. So it really is not an option anymore. It's those things that you have to do to protect that organization. And that is actually why these are coming down in cybersecurity, insurance requirements, compliance requirements, all these different things that you will conduct a pen test. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is when they talk about doing a pen test, they don't specifically state it, that it needs to be an all-out pen test.
Right.
Social, physical, internal, external, web application, Pen Test Plus. They're just saying you need a pen test. I would strongly encourage people don't interpret, we'll just do an external pen test on a single IP and that we can check the box.
We're good.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. No, that puts you personally at significant risk.
Well, and that's why in a report we have to put language of this is a point in time assessment.
Yes.
But also of in-scope devices, because
yes,
that's for many organizations they have given us full access, but also saying we don't always even know that. So in the example of the one IP, we wouldn't have known that, but we need to put that in there. And partly that would be, I think that's one of the arguments for an organization going as hard as they can. I used to do a lot of our phishing engagements, and I'd be in a kickoff call and somebody would say, I'd say, here's all the things we can do. There's the generic, or we can really be targeted and say, we can pretend to be a CEO. Here's an event that happens in your organization. It can be very specific about that. We can make it time critical. And I'd often have somebody say, we don't want to be mean. And what I wanted to say, but I didn't because, would be to say, yes, you actually really do. Because if you can test them with the strongest possible lure and they pass, all the rest of the stuff is easy.
Yeah.
If all I've tested is, they can see the thing that everybody sees.
Yeah.
Yes, your report says that your staff passed.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that good. And I think the same thing with, a single IP, or we have had this limited scope. Okay, great. Your report does say that. But Jonathan, I'm wondering, would there ever be a case where somebody said, we got breached, but we didn't know because you're a pen test, and it might come back on them that, but all you did was sort of the minimum. Yeah. Or is that something that because they've met the compliance, you did the pen test, who cares?
Well, I think there's two different kinds of harm there. There's reputational harm.
Right.
So if, let's say we did a pen test on an organization and they were ultimately compromised, and it was in a way that we should have pen tested, that we should have, maybe it was a particular host. Now, understand that, again, it's point in time. every month there are new critical updates that come out for, say, servers, as an example. It's not the only thing, but it's just so if you don't patch that month, then your machines are now a different type of vulnerability, a different type of vulnerable than they were last month because a new 0-day dropped or whatever. So we can only test what we can test at that time. However, if, let's say, you bought a pen test from a company and it was really just a vulnerability scan, and you received the report and it says, hey, here's all your machines and you need to patch, and you accepted that as a penetration test, and then you went to a compliance officer, an investigator, because you had a problem. Let's say you got a data breach, and they go, well, show me your pen test reports. And they're like, this is not a pen test. This is a vulnerability scan. And this is the honest truth. This has happened to me where I was doing some vCISO work for a client, and I wanted to see their last, couple of pen tests. And I got it, and I'm reading it, and it's like, this isn't a pen test. Well, yeah, it is. No, this is a vulnerability scan, and it's not even complete. It was literally the executive summary of the vulnerability scan, so it had no IPs and no vulnerabilities. And they go, well, we get that every quarter or year or whatever. It's like, no, this is not a pen test. This is a vulnerable. Well, that's what they sold it as. Okay, well, that breaks my heart. We need to do better as an industry. But it's dangerous because they thought they were fine. And then I come in as a CISO, by the way. I am not a pen tester. And I go, kerchunk, and I popped a box. And kerchunk, I popped a box. And kerchunk, I cracked a password. Now, if I can do it as a CISO, then think about what a professional hacker or professional pen tester can do. And so it really freaked them out. So they promptly got a pen test, and, and I will say this, just one more little tidbit, we're running close on time here, but you need to be prepped for a pen test.
Yes.
You can hire a company like us to come in and do a pen test, but as a CISO, as an IT, you really need to be prepped for a pen test. You need to understand what it is, how to scope it, how to use it, and I find so many people just don't do that. They're not prepared for the pen test. They don't know how to use it. They don't know what to do with it afterward. That's one of the reasons why we're talking about it today, is to kind of give them a kind of thing to think about. But you need to prep for it. Now, that's not saying we had one client who gave us a single machine that they had secured that machine down to an inch of its life.
And we didn't find anything so strange.
Obviously. Later, I did a quick search on my own when I was otherwise doing something for them. And I go, hey, guys, what about all these other ones that aren't set up that way? And they're like, well, we're working on that. It's like, okay, but the pen test was not a true representation of the risk profile of the organization. That's why in our report we say this is a snapshot in time in this environment. This is how it was set up, because we want them to be, for our own sake, we want to make sure that everyone is aware of what we are looking at, what we're testing, because it may not be representative of the entire environment. And in fact, a lot of cases it's not.
And I think one thing, being ready for a pen test is talking to a company and saying, where do we start? Because we have companies that, they may come to us and say, we're ready for a pen test. And we'll say, okay, well, actually we kind of, in conversation, maybe looking at your environment, actually first, you should have us do a vulnerability assessment.
Yes.
And then you address whatever you can address, whatever's critical. And then next quarter, we'll do a pen test.
Yes.
But if you've never had that done before, a full-on pen test is going to be overwhelming, it's confusing, and just what do you do with this, and potentially find way more than you can do anything with.
Yep. I will tell you, when I had Alias do my pen test, I let him go for 7 months. I let them attack us for 7. Now, we did 3 different phases, by the way. It wasn't just, they started in January and it was 3 different phases. And, I did a full out. I did a physical, an internal, an external, a social. I did everything. The only thing we didn't do is a web app pen test. But I says, guys, no holds barred. Don't, try not to touch our life safety system. So the fire alarm system, things like that. But otherwise, whatever you can get, let me know. And they went after it. Very rarely does someone ever come to them and say,
go for it,
whatever you can do, physical, break into stuff, do everything. But it was really important. Now, no one on campus knew except for me and general counsel. Campus security, the director of campus security knew. So the three of us knew this was happening because I wanted to make sure that we were all protected and everything. But afterward, when I was talking to the board about it, which I had great support from the board, but I said, okay, here's the report, kerchunk. Here was my report, kerchunk. And we had some really good board members who engaged and they really wanted to know about this stuff. And one of them asked me, well, how long did it take them? I was like, well, I let him go for about 7 months. And he sat there and he looked around and he goes, really? For 7 months? It's like, well, okay, we had phase 1, we did for a month or two, and then phase 2, and then phase 3. But fundamentally, I wanted them to test my system.
Right.
And honestly, for higher education, you kind of have to understand that it changes throughout the year because you have your semesters where students are there, then summer when students aren't there. So, things change throughout the year, and I need to understand my risk profile through the entire year. So, yeah, it took 7 months because I was very intentionally trying to understand where all of our risks were. And they really appreciated that. The university, the leadership appreciated it. We found some problems and we fixed them. We found some things that weren't broken, which I was really impressed with that they had tried. In fact, I had there was a line in there in the report. You may have written this line actually, all those years ago. But it said something to the effect of, whatever phishing tool you're using, continue using it, or something to that effect. And at the time, we didn't have one. Well, we did. It was word of mouth. So I did phishing training and I taught people, but we weren't using another tool. We hadn't gotten that yet. But every email that came into the university, people would send it to me and say, Jonathan, is this phishing? I don't want to click it. And I would check it. And so we had a really good engagement with that. And I was very proud of the fact that we passed all of those tests, even though we didn't have this was several years ago, by the way. It's very different nowadays. But, we passed all those tests, even with just people. It was that people firewall, that person making a decision. So, but it was useful to me because 7 months, it was a very long report. There was a lot of things. And I was able to go and I put the outline in front of the leadership and said, okay, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to change this. This is how much it's going to cost us. This is the priority. This is how long it's going to take. And the whole intent was we'd make systematic changes and we'd improve the system and then we'd have them back out. So we have them come out in a year to see where we're at and what we had fixed, make sure those changes actually took effect. Because a lot of times people will make a change. It doesn't actually change anything. The vulnerability is still there.
Or there's an update, and so you fixed it, and now it's not fixed anymore.
Right. And that's the other thing to think about the report. Be careful just trying to fix the individual things in the report. Instead, try to have a better process. So if something is not patched, you can absolutely go out and deploy patches manually. Do that, protect it, but then go fix your patching problem. Not just deploy an individual patch on this individual machine that has an individual vulnerability. Yes, do that immediately, but then go figure out why you didn't have the patches in the first place. Go fix your process. That's the kind of the last thing I really wanted to say is the pen test report really shows you things about your processes and how are you going to fix those processes.
And I think just one last thought is as you were talking about having it, tested over 7 months, semester, not semester. One thing you've really talked about, and you can watch other episodes where Jonathan does talk about this, is just the human element, because part of those controls is, it's the start of the semester, everybody's slammed.
Yes.
So not only is that new students, not only would that affect phishing and some of those things, also your environment is just in a different state because of all of that. So thinking about those people and being mindful of them and what that means for them, but also that does say something about your process, because if you don't have an effective patching process. Maybe you're totally keeping up in the summer and middle of the semester when it's going on, but man, first and last of the semester, that falls by the wayside. And I tell you, hackers are looking for that.
Yeah.
And they're intelligent. They know the human element. They're going to be looking for when you're weak, and they're going to go after you then.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a reality. People are people. And a lot of times the people that are attacking us, they're attacking systems, but a lot of times they're attacking people first. They're phishing them or they're social engineering them, whatever they're doing. So it's people attacking people, and that's what we're trying to protect from.
Yeah. Well, any last thoughts, Jonathan?
I think pen tests are extremely important. If you're not doing them, you need to. But I would caution you to spend some time planning for it and understanding how it's going to be beneficial to you, because just getting a pen test report doesn't help you. It's understanding what that pen test report means and then how you use it in your organization. That's where the real value comes in.
Right. Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again on the next episode of the SecureAF Podcast.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.